My name is Adeline Hayes, and I am 29 years old. For the past 4 years, I have been the head of the Sustainable Future Grant Committee at Terra Nova Solutions, one of the biggest ecotech firms in the country. My family, for their part, spent the better part of a decade telling me my degree in environmental science was a 4-year, $100,000 joke. They were ranchers, practical people with calloused hands, and a deep distrust for anything that couldn't be fixed with barbed wire or a stern look. They never, in their wildest, dust-choked dreams, imagined that one day their survival, the very legacy they held more sacred than anything, would depend entirely on the punchline. Before I get into the story of how I ended up holding my family's 100-year-old legacy in the palm of my hand, I'd love it if you let me know where you're all watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had your passion dismissed by the very people who should have believed in you the most, please do me a favor and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because this is a story of drought, desperation, and the kind of sweet, complicated justice you won't want to miss. It all started, as these things so often do, around a dinner table. I was 18, home from my first semester of college for Christmas, and my heart was full of the kind of earnest, world-changing passion that only youth and a good introductory ecology course can provide. The Oak Haven Ranch had been in the Hayes family for 4 generations. It was a sprawling, beautiful, and hard piece of land in central Texas, a place where the live oaks stood like ancient sentinels, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, the price of beef, and the ever-present threat of drought. My father, John Hayes, was a man carved from the same tough material as the land he worked. His love was as vast as his property, but his approval was a narrow gate, and I had never quite managed to squeeze through it. His son, my older brother Caleb, had slipped through with ease. Caleb was built in our father's image, tall, strong, and born with an innate understanding of cattle and machinery that had always eluded me. I was the reader, the dreamer, the girl who preferred a book in the shade of a pecan tree to the sun-blasted work of mending fences. My mother, a quiet woman who acted as the buffer in our family, had set out a feast that night. The air was filled with the scent of roast beef and rosemary potatoes, a scent that for my entire life had meant home and safety. My father was at the head of the table, carving the roast with a practiced, steady hand. Caleb was across from me, already piling his plate high. I had been waiting for the right moment, a lull in the talk about feed prices, and a broken pump on the south pasture. "Dad," I began, my voice a little too high. "I wanted to tell you something. I've decided on my major." My father grunted, not looking up from his task. "Figured you'd stick with that English nonsense. More books." "No, actually," I said, puffing my chest out with a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm declaring my major in environmental science." The carving knife stopped. My father slowly lifted his head, his brow furrowed in a look of profound confusion, as if I'd just announced I was moving to the moon. Caleb let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like a dog's bark. "Environmental science?" he scoffed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "What in the world are you going to do with that, Addie? Go hug a tree for a living." "It's not about hugging trees, Caleb," I retorted, my cheeks burning. "It's about understanding ecosystems, water conservation, sustainable agriculture, things that could actually help the ranch." My father finally spoke, his voice a low rumble of disappointment. "The ranch has been here for 100 years, Adeline. We didn't need a fancy degree to make it work. We needed hard work, common sense, and a strong back. Things you don't learn in a classroom." He placed a thick slice of beef on Caleb's plate, then a smaller one on my mother's, and finally, a perfunctory, thin slice on mine. The gesture was small, but the message was as clear as the wide Texas sky. Caleb was the heir, the one who would carry the legacy. I was an indulgence, a frivolous expense. "John," my mother said softly, her universal signal for him to soften his tone. But he ignored her. "It's a waste of time and a waste of good money, is what it is," he declared, finally sitting down. "You get that piece of paper, and what then? You gonna come back here and tell me how to run my own land based on some professor's book? No, thank you. You'll end up working for some government agency, telling real folks what they can and can't do. Or worse, you'll be one of them protesters we see on the news." The heat in my cheeks turned into a cold stone in my stomach. I looked at my brother, who was smirking into his mashed potatoes, and at my father, whose face was a mask of stubborn, unmovable pride. My mother gave me a small, pained smile of sympathy, but she said nothing more. In that moment, I felt a chasm open between me and them. They were a unit, a fortress of tradition and pragmatism. I was the outsider, the alien speaking a language they refused to understand. I ate my dinner in silence, the taste of roast beef turned to ash in my mouth. That night, I cried myself to sleep, mourning a kind of acceptance I knew, with a sudden and painful certainty, that I would never receive from them. Their dismissal wasn't just about my choice of study. It was a judgment on my very nature. I wasn't like them, and for that, I would always be less. That dinner was the beginning of a quiet estrangement, a slow drifting apart that would continue for the next 11 years. I pursued my useless degree with a ferocious determination, fueled by a spiteful need to prove them wrong, even if they would never be there to see it. Life in Austin was a different world. It was a city humming with energy, innovation, and a vibrant green ethos that felt like a balm on my wounded spirit. I had excelled in my studies, my quiet, bookish nature transforming into a sharp, analytical mind. I'd interned at a state environmental agency, then landed a junior position at Terra Nova Solutions right after graduation. Terra Nova was at the forefront of the ecotech revolution, a company dedicated to finding profitable, scalable solutions to the world's most pressing environmental problems. It was a place where my passion wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. It was a place where I, Adeline Hayes, the rancher's daughter who didn't fit in, had finally found my home. I rose quickly through the ranks. My practical upbringing, combined with my academic knowledge, gave me a unique perspective. I understood the language of both the boardroom and the back 40. Within 7 years, I was managing small projects. By year 9, I was made head of the Sustainable Future Grant Committee, a position of significant influence. Our committee managed a $50 million fund, awarding grants to agricultural operations that demonstrated a serious commitment to innovation and long-term sustainability. It was my dream job. I was making a real, tangible difference, funding the very ideas I'd tried to explain to my father all those years ago. My relationship with my family had settled into a pattern of polite distance. I sent birthday cards and Christmas presents. We had stilted, infrequent phone calls that skimmed the surface of our lives. They never asked about my work in any detail, and I stopped trying to explain it. To them, I had a cushy office job, in the city, a life of inexplicable ease that they vaguely disapproved of. My success was an abstraction they couldn't comprehend, so they mostly ignored it. My closest confidant was Dr. Anya Sharma, the brilliant, sharp-witted woman who had been my mentor at Terra Nova, and was now the vice president of a different division. She was one of the few people who knew the full story of my family dynamic. Anya had a way of cutting through the emotional fog with laser-like precision. Their inability to see your value is a reflection of their own limitations, Adeline, not yours, she'd told me more than once over lunch. Don't ever let their small world make you feel small. For a few years, I managed to do just that. I built a life for myself that was full and rewarding, a life completely separate from the dusty ranch and the weight of my family's expectations. But the land has a long memory and a way of pulling you back whether you want to go or not. The drought started slowly, as they always do. A dry spring, a summer with less rain than usual. By the third year, it was no longer a weather pattern, it was a crisis. News reports were filled with images of cracked earth and shrinking reservoirs. The state of Texas was a tinderbox. I started to hear the real fear creeping into my mother's voice during our weekly calls. She would try to be cheerful, talking about the church bake sale or a neighbor's new grandchild, but the strain was undeniable. "Oh, it's dry," she'd say with a forced lightness, "but your father's seen worse. We'll be fine. We always are." But I could hear the lie. I could hear the weariness in her sighs and the unspoken prayers for rain. I tried to offer suggestions, remembering articles I'd read or projects we'd funded at Terra Nova. "Mom, have they looked into any high-efficiency irrigation systems? There are new soil moisture sensors that could help manage what little water you have." There would be a pause, and I could picture her relaying the message to my father, who would be listening on the extension in the barn. "Your father says that's city talk, dear," she'd reply gently. "We have our ways." Their ways were failing. The hay yields were catastrophic, forcing them to buy feed at exorbitant prices. The creek that bisected their property, a constant in my childhood, had dwindled to a muddy trickle. They were selling off parts of the herd, a move that was like a rancher selling off pieces of his own soul. The financial strain was immense, a slow-motion catastrophe that was bringing a century of hay's legacy to its knees. Then came the phone call I had been both dreading and, in a strange, dark part of my heart, expecting. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office, a minimalist space with a large window overlooking the green hills of Austin. My phone buzzed, displaying Caleb's name. We hadn't spoken directly in months. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a social call. I answered with a cool, professional, "Hello, Caleb." There was no preamble. "No, how are you, Addie?" Just the raw sound of panic, barely masked by his usual bravado. "Addie, we're in trouble. Real trouble." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. "I know, Caleb. I've been reading the news. Mom told me things were bad." "Bad doesn't cover it," he said, his voice cracking. "The bank's calling. They're talking about foreclosure." "Dad," he's too proud to say it, "but we're about to lose everything, Addie." "Everything?" He let out a shaky breath. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my brother sound truly scared. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. His tone shifted immediately, sensing an opening. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a familiar, entitled edge. "There's this grant," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Some big tech company. Terranova Solutions. Ever heard of it?" I held my breath, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "The name sounds familiar," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "It's some greeny nonsense, all about sustainability and carbon footprints and whatever," he continued, completely oblivious. "But it's a huge payout. $500,000. It's a long shot, I know. A real rancher like Dad probably doesn't stand a chance against some corporate farm with a slick proposal written by a team of lawyers. But it's the only shot we have. It's our only hope." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was describing my life, my job, my entire world, and painting it as the enemy, the obstacle, while simultaneously begging for its salvation. Then came the part one knew was coming. "Listen, Addie," he said, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial tone. "The application is a beast, and there's a fee. And we're running on fumes. We need some cash to tide us over, to even get the application in and keep the bank from seizing the tractors. You're the one who ran off to the city, got some cushy office job. You've got to have money saved up. It's the least you can do. For the family." The sympathy I'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by the old, familiar sting of being seen not as a person, but as a resource. A cushy office job. He had no concept of the years of work, the 70-hour weeks, the stress and the pressure that had gotten me here. To him, I was just the lucky one who had escaped the hard work, and therefore, I owed them. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to say no, I heard myself agree. "Okay, Caleb. I'll wire you some money." "Thanks, Addie," he said, the relief in his voice immediate and cloying. "You're a lifesaver. We won't forget this." I knew they would. They would take the money as their due and forget the sacrifice it represented. I ended the call and stared out my window, a cold, hard knot tightening in my chest. I had just agreed to help fund an application that, if it reached the final stage, would land directly on my desk. 3 weeks passed. The money I sent was acknowledged with a brief text from Caleb. "Got it. THX." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken expectation. I threw myself into my work, trying to push the impending collision out of my mind. But it was always there, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my days. The day came as I knew it would. It was the deadline for the first-round review of the Sustainable Future Grant. My team had been working for weeks, culling hundreds of applications down to a manageable list of 20 finalists. The final stack was due on my desk by noon. Anya walked into my office, carrying a formidable tower of binders. She placed it on my conference table with a theatrical groan. "The best of the best," she said, smiling. "Or at least the best of what we received. A few impressive ones, a lot of maybes, and a couple of Hail Marys. The fate of American agriculture rests in your hands. Oh, great and powerful Hayes." I gave her a weak smile. "Thanks, Anya. I can't wait." She was about to leave when she paused. "Oh, there was one that came in right under the wire. A late addition to the finalist pile. The preliminary reviewers were on the fence about it. Said the operation had a long history, a legacy ranch, but the proposal itself was, well, you'll see. They bumped it to you for the final call." She tapped the binder on the very top of the stack. My blood ran cold. I knew, with absolute certainty, what I would see before I even looked. I waited until Anya had closed the door behind her before I reached for it. The plastic cover was cool beneath my trembling fingers. And there it was, in stark black and white. Grant proposal. The Oak Haven Ranch Revitalization Project. Applicants, John Hayes, Caleb Hayes. I sank into my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a sudden whoosh. It was real. It was here. It was on my desk. My hands shaking, I opened the binder. I had read hundreds of these proposals. I knew what a winning application looked like. It was forward-thinking, data-driven, and filled with specific, actionable plans. This was not that. The application was a monument to my father's pride and my brother's arrogance. It was written in a defiant, almost belligerent tone. It spoke of a century of tradition and common-sense ranching. It dismissed concepts like soil biodiversity and carbon sequestration as academic jargon. Their plan for water conservation was literally to pray for rain. Their budget was a mess of overestimated costs and vague line items. As a professional document, it was laughable. It was one of the weakest finalist proposals I had ever seen. But it wasn't just a professional document. It was a plea for survival from the two people who had spent my entire life telling me that my expertise was worthless. It was my father's legacy, my childhood home, distilled into 50 pages of stubborn, desperate, and utterly failing prose. I felt a dizzying wave of conflicting emotions. There was a grim, bitter satisfaction in seeing their ignorance laid bare, in knowing that they were now subject to my judgment. Then came a wave of crushing guilt. This was my family. Their home was on the line. How could I sit here in my climate-controlled office and coldly reject them? I did the only thing I could think to do. I picked up the binder and walked down the hall to Anya's office. I closed the door behind me and, without a word, placed the Oak Haven Ranch proposal on her desk. She read the cover page, then looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Oh, Adeline." "No." "Yes," I whispered. "That's it. That's them." Anya, ever the professional, spent 10 minutes silently reading through the proposal. Her expression was unreadable. Finally, she closed the binder and looked at me, her gaze filled with a mixture of sympathy and pragmatism. "Professionally," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "this is a non-starter. It reads like a manifesto against everything Terra Nova stands for. It's a rejection waiting to happen. Based on the paper in front of me, it doesn't even deserve its finalist spot." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know. Personally," she continued, leaning forward, "this is a nightmare. What do you want to do, Adeline? You can recuse yourself. I can take it, hand it to another committee head. No one would blame you." I thought about it. It was the easy way out. The safe way. I could wash my hands of the whole thing. But then another thought, cold and sharp, cut through the guilt. They had dismissed me. They had laughed at my dreams. They had told me I knew nothing about their world. For 11 years, I had built a career on the very principles they were now so ineptly trying to pay lip service to. Recusing myself felt like running away. It felt like letting them off the hook. Before I could answer Anya, my phone buzzed again. It was Caleb. I ignored it, but a moment later, a text message appeared. "Addie, call me. The bank is being a real pain. Just wanted to see if you've heard anything about that grant. It's probably all political anyway. A real rancher like Dad doesn't stand a chance against some corporate farm with a slick proposal." I read the message out loud to Anya. The dramatic irony hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. He was insulting me, my work, and my world, all while begging for its help. That text message solidified something in my mind. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about professional integrity. It was about a lifetime of being underestimated. I looked at Anya. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to recuse myself. This is my committee. This is my decision to lead. I'm going to treat this application like any other. I'm not going to sink them, but I'm not going to save them either. They want a grant from Terra Nova Solutions? Fine. Then they're going to have to meet the standards of Terra Nova Solutions. All of them." Anya studied my face for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," she said. "But you know what the next step is for a finalist with this many red flags?" I knew. It was a standard part of our due diligence for any application that was high risk, high reward, or, in this case, deeply problematic. "The site visit," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "Our analysts are stretched thin on the West Coast projects," Anya said, her tone carefully neutral. "For a legacy case this sensitive, and with this much missing information, protocol suggests a senior member should go. Or the head of the committee." We both knew what she was really saying. It had to be me. Sending a junior analyst into that environment would be a disaster. They'd be eaten alive by my father's stoicism and my brother's blustering charm. To get a true, unbiased assessment, to be fair to both Terra Nova and to them, the person who went had to be someone who couldn't be fooled. The person who went had to be me. The thought of it made me feel physically ill. Going back there not as a daughter, but as an assessor. A judge. It's the only way to be truly fair, Anya added softly, echoing my own thoughts. And to protect yourself professionally. She was right. I had to go. I had to look them in the eye and evaluate their life's work through the cold, clear lens of the expertise they had so thoroughly ridiculed. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically going through the other 19 applications, my mind constantly circling back to the one sitting in the center of my desk like a dormant bomb. The next morning I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed the ranch. Caleb answered on the second ring, his voice impatient. Yeah. I switched into my professional persona, the one I used with difficult clients. It was a shield, and I needed it desperately. Hello, this is Adeline Hayes calling from Terra Nova Solutions regarding the application for the Sustainable Future Grant. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of the wind whistling around the old ranch house. Adeline. Caleb's voice was filled with confusion. What are you talking about? What is this, a joke? It's not a joke, Caleb, I said, my voice calm and even. I work for Terra Nova. I have for 11 years. I'm the head of the grant committee. The silence stretched longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the disbelief warring with a dawning, opportunistic realization. You work for them? He stammered. The tree hugger company? His shock quickly melted into a greasy, triumphant excitement. Well, hell, Addie. This is perfect. This is incredible. So it's a done deal, right? You can just sign off on it and make sure we get it. The shield held. No, Caleb, I said, my tone becoming colder. That's not how this works. I am the head of the committee, which means I have a professional and ethical obligation to remain impartial. As part of our standard procedure for finalist applications, a site visit is required. I will be driving down to conduct that evaluation in 2 days. His excitement curdled into suspicion. Impartial? He scoffed, the old condescension creeping back into his voice. What do you mean impartial? It's your family's home, Addie. It's Dad's whole life. Don't go getting a big head now that you've got a fancy title. This is about family. The visit is about the grant, I corrected him sharply. It's about whether or not Oakhaven meets the criteria. The same criteria every other applicant has to meet. I'll be there on Friday at 10 in the morning. Please have all your financial records and operational data ready for my review. I hung up before he could argue further, my hand trembling slightly. The battle lines had been drawn. The 2-hour drive from Austin to the ranch was a journey through time. The lush, rolling hills of the city gradually gave way to the flat, sun-scorched plains of my youth. The green on the trees faded, replaced by the dusty brown of a land gasping for water. With every mile, I felt my carefully constructed Austin identity peeling away, leaving the raw, uncertain girl I used to be. I passed familiar landmarks, the old rusted water tower, the crooked fence post where I'd crashed my bike when I was 10, the turnoff to the creek that was now likely just a dusty ditch. I was returning as a stranger to the only home I had ever really known, armed with a clipboard and a power I had never asked for. I pulled up the long, gravel driveway in my company's silver hybrid sedan, a vehicle that looked as out of place here as I felt. The familiar white ranch house stood before me, its paint peeling slightly, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. My father and Caleb were waiting on the porch, their arms crossed, their faces grim. They looked like 2 soldiers preparing for an invasion. My father, John, was the one who hit me the hardest. He looked old. The harsh sun and the constant worry had carved deeper lines into his face. The unyielding strength I had always seen in him now looked like brittle pride, a thin shield against a world he no longer understood. For a moment, I just wanted to run to him, to hug him and tell him it would all be okay. But the woman who got out of the car wasn't just a daughter. She was an evaluator from Terra Nova Solutions. Dad. Caleb, I said, my voice steady. Adeline, my father grunted, his eyes scanning my sensible trousers and blouse with a flicker of disapproval. Caleb just nodded, his jaw tight. The tour was excruciating. With my clipboard in hand, I walked the land I had grown up on, but I saw it now with different eyes. I saw overgrazed pastures, soil erosion near the dry creek bed, and an ancient, inefficient pump groaning as it tried to draw water from a nearly depleted well. It was worse than I had imagined. The desperation wasn't an abstract financial problem anymore. It was written on the very face of the land. I asked my questions in a calm, professional monotone, ticking boxes on my evaluation form. What's your current water reclamation strategy? We use what the sky gives us, my father answered, his voice rough. I see. And your soil health monitoring? Caleb jumped in, trying to put a positive spin on it. We know our land, Addie. We can tell what it needs just by looking at it. We don't need fancy gadgets for that. The grant requires measurable data, Caleb, I said coolly. What are your plans for diversifying native grasses to improve drought resistance and forage quality? They exchanged a look of pure bewilderment. They had no plans. Their only plan had been to keep doing what they had always done, and hope for a different result. They were relying on a century of tradition in the face of an unprecedented climate crisis, and it was failing catastrophically. That evening, my mother tried to bridge the chasm with a feast. She'd made pot roast and pecan pie, a desperate offering of love and normalcy in a house choked with tension. The air at the dinner table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Caleb, unable to stand the silence, kept trying to steer the conversation back to the grant, his questions loaded with assumptions. So this visit is just a formality, right? He said, forcing a casual tone. You've seen the place. You know we work hard. Once you sign off on this, the money should come through in a few weeks. My father remained silent, staring at his plate, but I knew he was hanging on my every word. The weight of their hope was a physical pressure in the room. I put down my fork, the food on my plate untouched. I couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. Caleb, I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the strained atmosphere. I have to be honest with you. Based on your application, and based on everything I saw today, Oak Haven Ranch does not meet the core requirements of the Sustainable Future Grant. As it stands right now, I can't approve it. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's head snapped up, his face a thundercloud of disbelief and betrayal. Caleb's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. He was the first to find his voice, and it was dripping with venom. What do you mean you can't approve it? He snarled, leaning across the table. After everything? After we told you we're about to lose it all? We're your family. This is that useless degree talking, isn't it? You finally get your chance to come back here with your fancy words and your clipboard and look down on us. On real work. That's not what this is about. I started, but I was cut off. My father slammed his open palm on the oak table. The plates and glasses jumped. Enough, he roared, his voice shaking with a fury I hadn't seen since I was a child. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Your brother is right, Adeline. You left this life. You chose your world of books and theories over dirt and sweat. You don't get to come back here as some high-end mighty judge and tell us we're not good enough. This is our home you're throwing away because of some corporate checklist from your fancy city friends. The words hit me like a physical blow. The accusation, the injustice of it, stole my breath. All the hurt and resentment from that first dinner table confrontation a decade ago came rushing back, fresh and raw. But something was different this time. The 18-year-old girl who would have wilted and cried was gone. In her place was a 29-year-old woman who had built a career on facts, not feelings, and who was suddenly incandescently angry. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the wooden floor. I met my father's furious gaze, then my brother's sneering one. My voice, when I spoke, was dangerously calm. My useless degree, I said, the words sharp and precise, is the only reason you even have a 1 in a million shot at saving this place. That corporate checklist you despise is not about judging you. It's about ensuring this ranch can survive the next drought, and the one after that. It's about creating a future, not just clinging to a past that is dying. Your application is failing not because you're not good enough, but because it has no plan. No data. No vision. It is a suicide note for a century-old legacy. I let the words hang in the stunned silence. My mother was openly weeping now. Caleb looked like I had slapped him. My father's anger seemed to deflate, leaving behind a bewildered hurt. I'm staying at a hotel in town, I continued, my voice unwavering. The committee's final preliminary review is on Monday morning. You have 48 hours to submit a revised addendum to your proposal. A real one, with a real plan. If you want my help to write it, then you will call me. And when you do, you will not be speaking to your disappointing daughter. You will be speaking to the head of the committee, the only expert who can save you from yourselves. The choice is yours. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them sitting in the ruins of my mother's peace-offering dinner. I didn't look back. The drive to the sterile, anonymous hotel was a blur of tears, not of hurt, but of a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating rage. The power dynamic had shifted, and I had been the one to shift it. Now, I just had to wait and see if they would let their pride cost them everything, or if they would finally, after all these years, be willing to ask for my help. The first 24 hours were a torment of silence. I sat in my soulless hotel room, the generic art on the walls mocking me, and I waited. I alternated between staring at my phone, willing it to ring, and staring out the window at the unforgiving Texas sun. I half expected them not to call. Their pride was a legendary force, a geological feature of our family's landscape. I could easily picture them choosing foreclosure over the humiliation of admitting they needed me, of admitting that my path, the one they had so roundly condemned, was their only way out. I ordered room service I didn't eat and watched a movie I couldn't follow, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightening with every passing hour. Late in the afternoon of the second day, with the deadline looming, my phone finally rang. It wasn't Caleb. The caller ID simply said Oak Haven Ranch. My hand trembled as I answered. Hello. There was a long pause, filled with the static of a poor connection and the heavier static of a lifetime of unspoken things. Then a voice, raspy and humbled in a way I had never heard it before. It was my father. Adeline, he said, the name sounding foreign and formal on his tongue. We need your help. Another pause, longer this time. I heard him take a ragged breath. I don't know how to do this stuff. This new stuff. Tell us what to do. The admission, so simple and so profound, broke something open inside me. It wasn't a surrender, it was an invitation. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said and hung up. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic, focused work. I didn't return to the ranch as a daughter or a judge. I returned as a scientist, a strategist, a consultant. I turned the kitchen table, the site of so much family drama, into a command center. I unrolled topographical maps of the property, covered them in transparent overlays, and started drawing. I took my father, quiet and subdued, out to the parched pastures. I knelt in the dirt, crumbling it between my fingers. Dad, look, I said, pointing to the fine, powdery texture. The organic matter is gone. The soil can't hold water, even if it does rain. We need to implement a rotational grazing system and plant cover crops in the off-season to rebuild the topsoil. It will take time, but it will work. He didn't argue. He listened, his brow furrowed in concentration, really listening for the first time. I sat with Caleb, forcing him to look at the numbers. Not the sentimental value of the herd, but the hard data of their water consumption versus their market value. Caleb, the plan to sell off another 20% of the herd isn't a strategy, it's a liquidation. We need to focus on a smaller, higher-quality herd and supplement the ranch's income. Look at this, I said, pulling up data on my laptop. There's a huge market in Austin for organic, farm-to-table produce. This lower 40 acres has the best soil. With a high-efficiency drip irrigation system and solar-powered pumps, we could turn it into a significant new revenue stream within a year. He stared at the spreadsheets, his expression a mixture of resentment and dawning comprehension. Vegetables? He muttered, the word sounding like a curse. We're cattle ranchers. You're businessmen, I countered. And your business is failing. You have to adapt, or you will die. It was grueling. We argued. Old tensions flared. Caleb would bristle at my tone, and my father would retreat into sullen silence. But the ticking clock was our reluctant peacemaker. The shared, desperate goal of survival forced them to push past their pride and my resentment. For the first time in our lives, we were a team, and I was the undisputed captain. I dictated the words and Caleb typed them, his fingers, more accustomed to a wrench than a keyboard, moving slowly and awkwardly. I translated their century of tradition into the precise, data-driven language of sustainability that Terra Nova's board understood. We submitted the 10-page addendum, complete with revised budgets, soil analysis charts, and a phased implementation timeline, with less than 15 minutes to spare before the deadline. As I hit send on the email, a profound exhaustion settled over me, so deep it was in my bones. I looked at my father, slumped in his chair, and my brother, staring at the screen with hollow eyes. We had done the impossible. We had built a bridge between our two worlds. Now I had to go back to my world and fight for it. The Terra Nova Solutions boardroom was my real home turf. It was a space of cool glass, polished steel, and quiet, immense power. The air hummed with the silent operation of state-of-the-art technology. I sat at the head of the long, imposing table, feeling more in command here than I ever had at the ranch. My committee was assembled. Anya, looking supportive and curious, Ben Carter, our brilliant but notoriously cautious chief financial officer, whose job was to see risk in every proposal, and Marcus Vance, a grizzled, practical agriculturalist we'd hired away from a major university, who cared more about soil health than profit margins. The final 20 applications were projected on the massive screen at the end of the room. We worked through them methodically, debating, dissecting, and voting. My heart pounded a little harder each time we got closer to the end of the list. Finally, the Oak Haven Ranch proposal appeared on the screen. I took a sip of water, my hand steady. The final applicant, I announced, my voice even. Oak Haven Ranch. Before we begin, full disclosure is required. The primary applicants, John and Caleb Hayes, are my father and brother. Ben's eyebrows shot up. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Anya gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I am, of course, prepared to recuse myself from the final vote, I continued. However, as per protocol for a sensitive application, I conducted the site visit myself. I believe my findings and the context of the subsequent addendum are critical for this committee's decision-making process. I have documented all my interactions in the file. I presented the case with cold, clinical precision. I showed them the initial application, pointing out its profound weaknesses. Ben was already shaking his head. Then I brought up the addendum. I walked them through the new plan. The water reclamation, the soil remediation, the crop diversification. I could see Marcus lean forward, intrigued. When I finished, Ben was the first to speak, his voice sharp. Adeline, with all due respect, the initial proposal was a disaster. One of the worst I've seen make it to the finalist stage. This turnaround is miraculous. He let the word hang in the air. It seems less like a genuine change of heart, and more like a very well-coached essay that you helped them write. Are we funding a real shift in practice, or are we funding your family? The directness of the question stung, but I had expected it. Before I could answer, Marcus spoke up, his voice a thoughtful rasp. The criticism is fair, Ben. But the plan itself is solid. I mean, it's textbook. It addresses rotational grazing, cover crops, water capture. It's exactly the kind of holistic approach we look for. The question isn't whether the plan is good. The question is, can these old-school ranchers actually execute it? The debate raged for 10 minutes. It was the central, unanswerable question. Had they truly changed, or had they just said the magic words I'd given them to get the money? As they argued, my phone, sitting face down on the table, buzzed silently. I glanced down. A text from an unknown number. I frowned and opened it. The message was short. Addie, it's Bill Henderson from the next ranch over. You need to get down here. Your dad's out in the north pasture with a rented drilling rig. He's trying to sink a new well on his own. The man's going to have a heart attack or get himself killed. He won't listen to anyone. A wave of sheer panic washed over me, so intense it made the room swim. My father, stubborn and proud, was out there under the brutal sun, making one last, desperate, and dangerous stand. The image of him, alone and fighting a losing battle, filled my mind. And in that flash of panic came a moment of absolute, startling clarity. I stood up. The sudden movement silenced the room. All eyes were on me. But my father, he understood. He slowly lowered his hands from his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, but they were clear. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I think he saw me not as his bookish, wayward daughter, but as the woman I had become. He looked past me at the parched, dying land that had been his life's work. Your grandfather, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He always used to say that the land speaks to those who are willing to listen. I guess I spent my whole life listening to the wrong things. Or the wrong people. He pushed himself off the rig and took a hesitant step towards me. He stopped right in front of me and placed his rough, calloused hands on my shoulders. I'm sorry, Adeline, he whispered. I am so sorry. For not seeing you. It was the apology I had craved for more than a decade. The validation I had worked so hard to earn. And in that moment, receiving it, I realized something profound. It was wonderful to hear, but it wasn't the foundation of my worth anymore. The validation I had given myself in that boardroom, when I had bet on my own expertise, felt infinitely more solid and real. This was just a bonus. I gave him a small, genuine smile. We've got a lot of work to do, Dad. He nodded, a tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek, and then he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the awkward, perfunctory hugs of my childhood. It was a real, heartfelt embrace of acceptance and gratitude. Over his shoulder, I saw Caleb still struggling to process the new reality. He looked from his father hugging me, to the failed well, to the endless expanse of dry pasture. The evidence was overwhelming. His way had failed. My way had won. He finally met my eyes, and with a slow, reluctant nod, he gave in. Okay, he muttered, the word tasting like defeat and a sliver of hope. Okay, boss. The first day of the new regime at Oakhaven Ranch began a week later. The first tranche of the grant money had arrived, staving off the bank and allowing us to order supplies. The scene would have been unimaginable just a month before. I was standing in the lower 40 acres, not in a business suit, but in dusty jeans and steel-toed work boots. A large, laminated map of the ranch was spread across the hood of my rented pickup truck. I was pointing to a section marked for a new solar array. The panel installation starts here tomorrow, I was saying. That will power the pumps for the new drip irrigation system. Caleb, I need you to start digging the main trench along this line here. Dad, I need you to go into town and pick up the soil testing kits from the depot. My father, who for 50 years had been the one giving the orders on this land, simply nodded. On it, he said, and walked towards his truck without a single word of argument. Caleb grumbled under his breath, digging ditches. Great. But he picked up a shovel and headed towards the spot I had indicated. He was working. He was listening. It was the start of a long, arduous process. There were arguments. There were days filled with frustration and doubt. But something fundamental had shifted. We were rebuilding not just a ranch, but a family from the ground up, on a new and more honest foundation. And I was the architect. 2 years passed. The transformation of Oakhaven Ranch was nothing short of miraculous. The parched fields were now mosaics of green, thriving on a fraction of the water they once consumed. Rotational grazing had allowed native grasses to return, their deep roots holding the precious topsoil in place. The cattle, a smaller but healthier herd, grazed peacefully. And in the lower 40 acres, rows and rows of vibrant vegetables grew under the Texas sun. The small farm-to-table produce business I had proposed was now a thriving enterprise, with a waiting list of chefs in Austin eager for our weekly deliveries. Oakhaven, once a symbol of dying tradition, was now being hailed as a model for the future of sustainable ranching in the region. The atmosphere in the family had transformed just as dramatically. The tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy respect. Sunday barbecues were no longer a minefield of unspoken resentments. Now, Caleb would talk excitedly about the new soil moisture sensors he'd installed, showing me the data on his tablet. My father, in front of neighbors, would brag about my work, about how his daughter, the scientist, had saved them all. They didn't just respect me because I had rescued them from financial ruin. They respected me because they had witnessed my expertise firsthand, day after day, for 18 months. They had seen my plans work. They valued me for who I truly was, not for who they had wanted me to be. One sunny afternoon, while I was inspecting the new greenhouse we'd built, my phone rang. It was Anya. So, she said, her voice warm and smiling. Your official leave of absence is long over. The board has officially approved your promotion to Director of North American Programs. Your new office is waiting for you. It has an even better view. When are you coming back to Austin, boss? I smiled, leaning against the warm glass of the greenhouse. I looked out over the thriving ranch, the green fields, the healthy cattle, the solar panels glinting in the sun. I looked towards the ranch house, where my father and brother were working together, repairing a piece of equipment, their movements in sync. I had come here to heal the land, and in doing so, I had healed my family. But the most important healing had happened within myself. I had finally integrated the two halves of my identity, the rancher's daughter and the environmental scientist. I no longer had to choose. I'm not coming back to the office full-time, Anya, I said, a sense of profound peace settling over me. I've already sent in my proposal. I want to be Terra Nova's first senior field consultant and rural programs manager. My office is right here. Anya was silent for a moment. Then she laughed, a sound of pure delight. I should have known, she said. The board will love it. Congratulations, Adeline. You built your own empire. She was right. I had. Not an empire of money or power, but an empire of growth, healing, and purpose. In the end, that useless degree didn't just save my family's ranch. It saved my family. More importantly, it taught me that your own worth isn't something that can be granted to you by others, not even by the people you love the most. It's something you have to build yourself from the ground up, with expertise, with courage, and with an unwavering belief in your own vision. The victory wasn't just in saving their legacy, it was in forcing them to become part of mine. Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth to someone you love, or to a world that didn't understand your passion? Please share your story in the comments below. I truly read them and find so much strength in our shared experiences. And please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories of struggle and triumph. Thank you so much for listening to me today. And I want you to remember, sometimes the most fertile ground for your own growth is the very place where you were once told nothing good could ever bloom.